is an airplane I could drive in. First of all, I've never been in the military, don't claim to, but I have a great respect for those who have been in the military. We have all of our veterans stand. I know there's veterans out here. Here you go. They're standing up. Really, I'm trying to get you to stand up so you don't fall asleep on me. You see all these men standing? I think we all need to give them a round of applause. So we've all been out the show and seen all of our tractors and all the farm equipment, and what people don't realize is what an impact that Oliver had in the defense world, for the military, for the war, for everything that they did. So I'm going to cover some of that tonight, if I can get my electronics to work. So Hart, Parr, and Oliver at war, finest in defense machinery. It doesn't work. There it goes. Did you do that or did I do that? Okay, I guess I have to nod at you every time. So it didn't matter if it was land, air, sea, Oliver had their hand in it. So it all started back in about 1915 with Hart, Parr. And Hart, Parr got a contract from the military, or from the government actually, for $1.5 million to build 9.2 shells for the British government. So for Hart, Parr to do this, they had to design some special lathes. So this is a picture of the old original shell room. And if you see the sawtooth roof back there, that's where it first started, but they had so much to do that they added on. So the other rooms, those all became the shell rooms. And the contract was so good, in April of 1916, they had 255 men employed at the shell department, and the numbers were increasing daily. So they added more buildings at a great expense, and they figured, even though it was a large investment, by 1917, they'd have it paid off. So they had to build their own lathes in order to do this, and you can see the Hart, Parr lathe there. For you guys up here, can you see okay? Or you might have to just move to the back, or go ahead and take a nap. I'll wake you up when it's done. These are the Hart, Parr lathes that Hart, Parr actually designed to build those. So they built 100 of them in total. So there were quite a few of them built. The Canadian companies saw these lathes and were pretty impressed by them, so they ended up ordering a bunch of them for themselves too. So they bought $50,000 worth of lathes off of Hart, Parr back in the early days. So when they started building the shells, these are the rough forgings, and they'd have them piled outside, fields just full of them. They would bring them in to these lathes, and you can see the boring bits sticking out of the end. Right there. They would clamp all the shells in there. You see some of them clamped in. And the first thing they would do is bore into those shells. That's a close-up of the boring bit, and you can see part of the shell right there that's already been bored out. They also had some pretty neat tools for sharpening these bits, but I didn't put the picture in there. But they had a lot of work to do. Just by the time you got done boring one, you probably had to take a bit off, sharpen it, and keep going. So there's another picture of the boring room where they were working on them. And this is in the new building. You see how nice it is. And these, it had to be pretty new here. And they were just lined with lathes. When they got done boring them, they also had to trim the outside of them. So there you can see them being turned down on that lathe. This is just another picture of them on the lathe after they get them bored out and moved over into that stand, and they move on to the next department. These are rooms stockpiled of them. You can see on these, they've already got the groove in there. Those had to be grooved to put the ends on them. So they're getting ready to go into the next division. This is an interesting room because this is an oven, and they have these little copper rings. They would move these in there, and they'd get annealed in there. What I like about this picture is the way they move stuff. You can see this rail right here, and there's this little cart right here. So you put stuff on this cart, wheel it right back to here, or they can take this cart and just roll it over to here and move it back and over. So here you've got a bunch of British inspectors looking at all the shells, and of course everything is built to high tolerance when you're working with the Defense Department or military. So they had to get their okay for everything. Hart Parr would bundle these up. They sold them for $50 a shell, which was pretty expensive back then. And they would sell them in lots of 250. And so you could see they're all put in their little crates back there, and that's how they would get delivered, in lots of 250. So they missed a deadline. They were building these shells, building a lot of them, got into 1917, and were just getting to the point where they were going to be able to pay for everything that they had done. And they missed a deadline due to some shortages of material, and thought that would be okay, and the British decided, no, that's not okay, and they canceled the contract. And there they sat, unable to pay for everything. So, or unable to profit from it. They got it paid for, but there was no more profit. So they went after some other contracts, and one of the contracts they got was building the wheels for the Nash truck. So these had to be built to pretty high tolerances there and turned down. So you can see those are the wheels, and they got a contract, and before it was all said and done, they built 20,000 of those. So here they are. There's a lot of them being turned down on the lathes, and they could turn those out at 100 per day. So after building over 20,000 of them, and you still see some that shows once in a while on trucks, and if you look, I've got this blown up, but right there, if you get around a Nash truck, look for the initials HP, and you will know those wheels are cast by Hart Parr. So after the shell contract, they went after some other government contracts, and they actually got, these are for steering the steamships for the Navy, for their steering gears on here. So they built, I think around 292 of these got built. They also built these. These are windlass. It looks like a winch, but it's not. It's for turning the rudder on a ship. And I crew on an LST, and we have something similar to this too, where it's all done with chains of cables, but if something breaks, you got to go down there and manually do it too. So they built some of these for the ships, for the Navy. And they also got a contract to build engines, the steam engines for the Navy ships. So that's what this is all about. In addition to that, and we're still in World War I. In addition to that, they got the contract to build these gun mounts. And you can see the bases of them, and somebody would stand back there and swivel around. This is kind of a finished product. Here in the foundry, you can see in the front, they're in their heyday. There's one of those base mounts for the guns. There are the Nash wheels, and there's some of the steering gears for the ships. So this was where it all started, right there in the foundry. And from there, we go on to the machining and production. So that's what Hart Parr was up to. Cletrac, who was really focusing on just building equipment to go out and keep farming. They didn't have a lot of contracts in World War II, or World War I, I'm sorry, but they were pretty active, helping out in the war efforts wherever they could. And this is a H, Cletrac H, used by a bunch of sailors to pull what I think is a jenny out of the water for Marines, sailors, somebody. Here's an H also. This is used at Camp Sherman, and they're setting rails with this. So even though they weren't really doing a lot to build things for the defense contracts, they were using their products in defenses. And in the back, what I think is neat on this picture is look at all those shocks back there. I don't know if you can see those or not, but there's a lot of shocks a week back there. That's a lot of labor. And the Oliver Chill Plow Works, they were not to be left out, sort of. So what appears to be a tank right here, and this is a Liberty Loan Parade in South Bend, World War I. It's even got Oliver on it. But what you don't know is that is made out of wood. So that is not a real tank, and it's hard to see, but underneath, there's a tractor underneath there. These are the tractor wheels. So Oliver felt it was more important for them to keep the tools going to feed the soldiers than it was to actually make war products. So Oliver did not make much the Chill Plow Works during World War I. And I'm sure that does not exist anymore, but it'd be neat to build one, put in a parade. I don't know, today you get in trouble for stuff like that though. So then we go up to World War II, and we can't forget about Cletrac's big effort they did with this, with the MG tractors. I believe this one's in the Solomon Islands. And they built thousands, quite a few thousands of these. I don't think we have an exact number, do we? Just thousands. That were used. They were actually called airport tractors. In some of my research, I found some of the diaries from the LSTs, and the LSTs had some of these on them where they would transport them out to wherever the crew was at, and they actually called them Cletrac airport tractors. But they're known as bomber nurses, MG1s, MG2s. There were some of these that were built for Cletrac by John Deere. So they're still gonna have the Cletrac dash, or the grill casting on it. It's still gonna be a Cletrac, but it will say made by John Deere. And John Deere needed something to do because there wasn't a lot of call for those 2-cylinder tractors in the war effort. So Cletrac kept them busy. This is one of my favorite pictures. Of course I like airplanes. And after today, I really want one of those crawlers. I don't know if you saw me riding one around today, but it's going home with me. I went through the parade and took a little ride out back and ran over a couple cars. And, you know, you come to a tractor show in a Prius, that's what you're gonna get. But this is a really nice picture of a Cletrac bomber nurse doing what it was made to do. This is one that wasn't quite so lucky. Found this picture in the archives, and this is, I know from being around airplanes, this airplane was moving when it hit this. The prop was turning, so you can see the props are all bent back. So I don't know who got in the way, but there was a little collision there. Cletrac did a lot of other things during the war too. There's not a lot of pictures of them, but the bomber nurses, of course, and they did the M47 final drive assemblies. They did armor casting of the final drive carriers. So there were a lot of parts that they built for the military, just for tanks. Probably did some gun parts too. So in 1941, Oliver signed a major contract. This is right at the beginning of World War II, for bomb crates. And this is a bomb crate, and this is what they would shove the bomb in before they put them on the airplanes, or on the bombers. They also had contract for shells, signal flares, a lot of tank parts, transmissions and gun mounts. They also ended up building a lot of parts for other people that had contracts. And one I'm really excited about going and looking at now is the gray marine engines. They did some of the castings for that, and the transmissions in the Higgins boats. And I've spent a little bit of time playing on those, and it's got a gray marine in it. And next time I'm out there, I'm going to be all over that thing, see if there's any sign that might have been built by Oliver. If it was, it's going home with me too. So over in York, PA, they're not to be left out either. So they built a lot of parts for the tanks, and in this one they built the gun barrels. They were working on those. They built the fuel tanks, So there's a lot of weldment parts that went underneath there. So they worked on those. They worked on the 106 millimeter coilless rifle barrel, 90 millimeter cartridge cases. One of their big things, because of course Farquhar, York, Pennsylvania, was the home of Farquhar, they did all those conveyors, so conveyor belts. They did a lot of those for transport of goods going onto the ships. They built some that were 141 feet long to get on some of the big ships, and instead of belting, they had this like steel mesh, that a one-piece unit, 141 feet long. And they got pictures of those loading the big ships up. So that was a big part of their contribution. And the Farquhar plant also received the Army-Navy E Award 5 times for the production of their 81 millimeter mortar shells, which is getting those awards. That's some pretty good stuff. And Oliver had some good quality products. It wasn't just tractors, a little bit of everything. Those are the gun barrels. That's some of them that they made there in York. There's some of them on the lathe as they're turning the barrels down at the Farquhar plant in York. Oh, it is Gilroy. Yeah, my notes are off. Okay, so Gilroy was BG out in California. They also built some of the barrels. They did a lot of the pan scrapers that went over to Korea. They contributed to that quite a bit. Now we're back to York. This is Farquhar. These are sprayer units, and of course they were big in orchard sprayers and all the different kinds of sprayers. So this one was used for chemicals and disinfectants, things like that for the medical division of the military. And here at York, they're turning down the 106 millimeter barrels there also. This one's pretty self-explanatory, the walloping wheelbarrow, so the 106 millimeter recoilless rifle. These were, the barrel was at York, and other parts of it I know were built in South Bend and some other plants, everybody helped out. There were little pieces everywhere, just depending on what kind of machinery that you had there in the plant. What was the big press we were just looking at in, that was a Battle Creek. 7,000 ton press that they had in Battle Creek. That could really stamp some stuff out, but we'll get into that in a minute. So here are the transmission assemblies. Those are made in Charles City for the 25-ton carrier. They also made some of the U-joint shafts for the 2.5-ton M34 cargo truck. Those are in South Bend. Not so fast. They made the axle assemblies in South Bend. These are for the 20-ton crane carriers. So, and I don't know, has anybody ever seen one of these to know if there was ever casting in it or anything that might have identified it as Oliver? Or you probably didn't even know they made them. Everybody be looking now. And of course, the 155 howitzer, those were a pretty big piece that was made by Oliver at several different plants. Shelbyville made a lot of it. There was some of the gun mount bracketry that was made in South Bend. And this is a picture in, I think it's Leaf River, Illinois. And there are several of these scattered around. And if you go look at them, go ahead. Make sure you look for that tag, because it does say the Oliver Corporation. I know there's one here in Missouri somewhere, there's one in Pennsylvania, there's one in Kentucky. Some of the parks or VFW halls that you'll see machinery sitting at, you might want to stop and look at them, because it might say Oliver. Do not take the tag off of it. But that picture was taken in Shelbyville as they're working on the weldment on the base. Okay. That's another good example. And it'll say below it 1955. I think the other one might have said 1956. Okay, yeah, that's 56, and that was a 55. So it's got a serial number on it, but the best part says the Oliver Corporation. So Oliver was pretty big in those howitzer guns. In Springfield, they made the signal flares. They had a way of forging them, pressing them out, and it was exemplary to what they wanted, so they made a lot of those in Springfield, which I'd like to run to the antique store over there sometime and see if we can find one. But again, you never know. Up in Battle Creek, they were building these oil cooler fans for the tanks, and they had the work of most of the assembly of the whole thing. They had devised a method somehow of brazing those fins onto that shaft, and from the turbines I've been around, that's pretty delicate work, and they were superior in that. They built a lot of those. So my favorite, of course, is the airplane. So Battle Creek, Michigan had the Oliver Aviation Division, and it was in 1951, they received the largest defense contract ever by Oliver, and that was from Boeing. So they knew they couldn't do it where they were, so they bought that plant. It was a printing plant, and they bought that, set that up to be their aviation division, started tooling it all up, started building Boeing fuselages for the RB-47 in 1952, rolled the first one out in 53, and in 1953, Oliver recorded their highest sales ever of $46 million. The year before, it was $17 million. So it shows there's a lot more money in airplanes than there are tractors. But as you can see, when they're building an airplane, they send things out to everybody. Line 42, I believe, is the fuselage assembly. If you look over, it says the Oliver Corporation. I was lucky enough to acquire all the blueprints, so if you see me building a long building, you're going to know what's up. So, this is them putting the fuselages together in that plant. As you can see in the middle, there's railroad tracks. There's quite a few fuselage sections, so as they would get done with them, they would bring a crane over, lift that section up, roll in a train car, move it over, set it on there, strap it down, and off it would go to Wichita for its final assembly. But Oliver built 255 of those. When their contract ended in around 1955, yeah, that was about 55. They finished up with their contract and they didn't get renewed. They didn't build any more of those. So there Oliver sat with an empty building. So they decided they'd start building the 44. The Super 44 was intended to be built in Battle Creek. They did build a few of them up there, and then they decided this great big building is too big for the Super 44. So they got rid of this building, still had some empty space, and that's when they brought in the outboard motor division in Battle Creek to try and take up some space, to provide some jobs up there for all the jobs that had been lost doing this. So Oliver had a lot of money, a lot of revenue coming in from the war, defense efforts, building equipment. When that all ended in the mid to late 50s, it was all done. They'd invested a lot of money in tooling, in buildings, and everything. So they've lost all those sales now, and it took a pretty good hit for Oliver. So people think that farm equipment that was starting to go downhill, that's not necessarily so. They had a lot invested. They lost a lot of revenue, so there was kind of a trickle-down effect. But the Defense Division, all the sales to Oliver was pretty big. So you want to talk about why Oliver went away, losing all those contracts, kind of fits into that conversation. So now you know, we go out there tomorrow and there's all kinds of green tractors everywhere, and there's a few industrial tractors out there, and then there's one crawler out there that don't look at it. Got for sale sign, don't look at it. Where at, Jerry? Where's Jerry? I know he's sitting over there. Is he asleep? Hey! Yeah, there's a good example over there, and if you go look at that, those are the kind of things that Oliver built, Oliver, Cletrack, Hart, Parr, everybody contributed to the defense of this country. And And you should all be proud that even though you got one of their farm tractors, you still got part of it. So, thank you very much.